Friends, I need you to lean in and hear this today, because what I'm about to share is not just advice, it is a revelation straight from heaven. God has spoken to me personally about something so simple, yet so powerful, that it could change the way you walk in favor, protection, and supernatural alignment. It is about choices, about details you may never have noticed, about the colors you wear, the actions you take, and the moments you think are small. But God says, I am with you in every detail, and I will guide you if you will listen. Today, I want you to open your heart, because God's Spirit is moving, ready to show you the hidden keys to walking in victory every single day. God guides us even in the smallest details of life. Often we think of God's guidance as something grand and monumental. We imagine Him speaking to us in thunderous ways, or that His instructions must always involve life-changing decisions that shake the foundations of our existence. But the truth is, God is attentive to every facet of our lives, down to the smallest details that we may easily overlook. The Spirit moves not only in the moments of crisis or in the heights of spiritual experiences, but also in the quiet, seemingly insignificant corners of our daily lives. God's guidance is comprehensive. It is not partial or selective. He does not only care about the big choices we make, like our careers, our marriages, or our major investments. He also cares about the small ones, what we eat, how we respond to others, the words we speak, the thoughts we entertain, and even the colors we choose to wear. Every decision we make is observed by Him, and every choice carries potential consequences. Many times people underestimate this. They say, how can God care about something as small as my clothes or my schedule? Yet the Bible tells us that He knows the hairs on our head and sees every sparrow that falls. He is intimately involved in our lives. This is why it is so vital to cultivate an awareness of His presence and to seek His guidance continuously in everything. The moment we begin to understand that God is active in the smallest details, we start walking in alignment with His will, and the blessings flow more abundantly than we could ever imagine. It is a simple truth, yet profound in its implications. Nothing is too small for God to intervene in, nothing too trivial for Him to notice. When we live with this consciousness, our lives begin to reflect His order, His protection, and His favor in ways that are miraculous, yet often subtle. This brings us to another revelation that God showed me. Some colors can attract heaviness, fear, or spiritual blockage. At first, this may sound unusual or even unbelievable, but the Spirit is precise, and His guidance extends even into areas that appear mundane to our natural eyes. Colors are not just aesthetic choices. They carry energy and influence the atmosphere around us. They can affect our moods, our interactions, and even the spiritual environment we step into. There are colors that resonate with fear, anxiety, and heaviness, subtly opening doors to challenges that might have been avoided. Just as light can illuminate a room and darken another, colors can attract certain spiritual atmospheres. God revealed to me that when certain colors are worn, they can create an environment where discouragement, delay, or fear is more likely to manifest. This is not superstition, it is a spiritual principle. The world is full of spiritual realities that influence our daily lives, and God desires for us to navigate these realities with discernment. I remember the moment this was revealed to me. It was not in a dramatic vision or a loud voice, but a quiet whisper in my heart. The Spirit was clear. Some colors, when worn, may hinder the flow of favor, protection, or peace. This is why it is crucial to align our choices, even seemingly trivial ones, with the guidance of God. Obedience in these small areas is a reflection of faith, and faith opens the door to supernatural intervention. Many believers focus on major acts of obedience, but neglect the subtle instructions of the Spirit. Yet, God desires that we follow Him in all things, not just the obvious ones. He is concerned with our entire life experience, and His guidance encompasses every decision, visible and invisible. There is a profound wisdom in this. When we obey God's guidance in the small details, we are demonstrating trust in His sovereignty. Trust is not only shown in major crises, but in the everyday decisions where our faith is tested subtly. Choosing to follow God's guidance in something as simple as a color may seem insignificant, but it is a demonstration of our willingness to submit to His authority. This submission invites His protection and His blessings in a tangible way. Conversely, disregarding His instruction in even minor matters can leave us vulnerable to discouragement, spiritual attacks, or missed opportunities. The enemy seeks to blind us to these truths because he knows that when we walk in alignment with God's guidance, our lives carry influence and impact far beyond what we can see. Colors, like other elements in our daily environment, interact with spiritual forces. Some colors amplify courage, peace, and joy, while others may resonate with fear, heaviness, or confusion. It is important to understand that God's guidance is not about superstition or fear-based rules. Rather, it is about alignment with divine order. When the Spirit warns against a particular color, it is a protective measure, a way to prevent unnecessary spiritual hindrance. The obedience of faith is a powerful channel for God's intervention. It is through such obedience that we experience breakthroughs that seem miraculous, yet are perfectly logical in the spiritual law of cause and effect. God's instructions, even in subtle matters, are designed to safeguard us, guide us, and prepare the ground for His blessings to manifest. It is also essential to recognize that God's guidance is relational. He communicates with those who seek Him, who are sensitive to His Spirit, and who cultivate an intimate connection with Him. The revelation about colors is one example of how He speaks to us personally, tailoring His guidance to our lives. What may be a minor detail for one person could be a significant spiritual safeguard for another. God's wisdom is individualized. He sees the entirety of our lives and knows what will influence us positively or negatively. This is why cultivating discernment and spiritual sensitivity is so crucial. When we become attentive to His guidance, we learn to recognize subtle nudges, quiet warnings, and precise instructions that can transform our daily lives. The interplay between God's guidance in small details and the influence of colors is profound. When we embrace God's instruction, we demonstrate that our faith is not superficial, not selective, but holistic. Holistic faith considers the totality of God's involvement in our lives and seeks to align every decision, every action, and even our external expressions, such as clothing choices, with His will. This alignment creates an environment in which the Spirit can operate freely, where favor flows unhindered, and where protection surrounds us. It is not a matter of fear, but of wisdom, a recognition that God's insights are higher than our understanding, and that His protective care extends to all aspects of our lives. Obedience to these small instructions builds spiritual momentum. The moment we act on the guidance about a particular color, we begin to experience shifts. Circumstances that once seemed stagnant become fluid. Relationships that were tense begin to improve. Opportunities that were previously blocked open up. This is the principle of spiritual alignment. When we move according to God's instruction, even in small matters, we position ourselves to receive His blessings, protection, and favor. It is a principle that works consistently, whether it is in major life decisions or in the seemingly trivial choices we make every day. Understanding that God guides us in every detail and that some colors can attract heaviness challenges us to live intentionally. It calls us to develop spiritual sensitivity, to seek divine guidance, and to obey faithfully in every area of life. It reminds us that nothing in life is too small for God to influence and nothing is too insignificant for Him to care about. As we cultivate this awareness, we begin to see the interconnectedness of our decisions, the spiritual dynamics that influence our lives, and the protective power of obedience to God brings protection and favor. This is a truth that many of us know intellectually but rarely grasp fully in practice. Obedience is more than simply following rules or rituals. It is a demonstration of faith, trust, and alignment with the heart of God. When we obey, even in things that seem small or insignificant, we invite His presence, His power, and His blessings into our lives. Many people pray for protection, pray for favor, pray for guidance, but their hearts remain divided, their actions inconsistent, and their obedience selective. God desires a full surrender, not just occasional compliance. When we obey Him in every area, we place ourselves under the canopy of divine favor, and we activate a supernatural covering that shields us from spiritual attack, misfortune, and delay. Protection from God is not always visible immediately, but it is real. There are moments when unseen forces are poised to disrupt, derail, or harm, and yet those who obey the guidance of the Spirit are preserved. This preservation is often subtle, almost invisible to the natural eye. It may come in the form of opportunities that arrive just in time, accidents that are avoided without explanation, or relationships that are mended at the right moment. God's favor and protection operate like a shield around those who follow Him wholeheartedly, and obedience is the key that unlocks this shield. Favor is more than luck. It is God's grace flowing through a life that is positioned correctly by obedience. The world may not understand it, and circumstances may appear unchanged, but faith sees the hand of God at work behind the scenes, orchestrating every detail for our good. The enemy, however, does not want us to experience this protection and favor. He thrives on disobedience, distraction, and destruction because these create openings for discouragement, misfortune, and delay. Spiritual blindness occurs when we ignore the gentle instructions of God in daily life. The subtle nudges of the Spirit may be dismissed as coincidence, personal preference, or mere intuition, but they are divine guidance in disguise. When we learn to obey even the small directions from God, we step into alignment with His will, and the enemy cannot find a foothold. Disobedience, on the other hand, even in minor areas, allows disruption and hinders the flow of blessings that God desires to release. This is why obedience is not just an act. It is a strategy for spiritual victory and alignment with divine purpose. Faith expressed through action, not just prayer, is the demonstration of trust in God's authority. Many believers pray fervently and yet see little change because their prayers are not accompanied by the actions that reflect trust in what God is saying. Faith without works is incomplete. It is the movement of our obedience that confirms our trust. When God instructs, He expects not just acknowledgement but action. It is in the application of His word and guidance that faith becomes tangible and transformative. Every act of obedience, no matter how small, is a declaration that we believe in God's wisdom, that we trust His insight, and that we submit to His sovereignty. This combination of faith and action invites favor, manifests protection, and produces results that defy natural explanation. The enemy works tirelessly to distort our perception of God's instructions. He disguises distractions as harmless, downplays the importance of guidance, and tempts us to choose comfort over obedience. Yet, God's word reminds us that spiritual discernment and vigilance are essential. Obedience becomes the spiritual armor that allows us to navigate these subtleties with clarity and power. Each instruction from God, whether major or minor, carries the potential to shift our lives profoundly. When we obey, we do not merely avoid negative consequences. We actively position ourselves to experience breakthroughs, miracles, and divine favor. God's insight is higher than human understanding. This is a principle that must be embraced fully if we are to live victorious lives. Human reasoning often seeks to limit God to what is logical or explainable, but His wisdom transcends the boundaries of our understanding. He sees the end from the beginning, the invisible forces that influence our lives, and the unseen spiritual realities that affect our circumstances. When God instructs, He does so with perfect knowledge and infinite wisdom. Our role is not to question the logic of His guidance, but to obey and trust that His direction produces the optimal outcome. Even when His instructions seem unusual, difficult, or contrary to our personal preference, they carry the promise of protection, blessing, and favor when faithfully followed. Understanding that God's wisdom surpasses human understanding requires humility. We must acknowledge that we cannot see all the spiritual dynamics at play and that our perception is limited. There are forces and influences in the unseen realm that affect our physical and spiritual well-being. Obedience to God, even in small matters, is an acknowledgement that we trust His vision above our own. It is the act of surrendering our judgment and embracing His authority. When we live this way, our lives are shielded by His protection and illuminated by His favor. The decisions we make are aligned with the divine blueprint, and this alignment ensures that our journey flows with supernatural efficiency rather than unnecessary struggle. Small choices can open doors to blessing or delay. Many believers fail to recognize the cumulative power of minor decisions. While major life choices certainly shape our destiny, the small decisions, what we say, what we think, what we wear, how we respond, carry enormous spiritual weight. God pays attention to these moments because they reflect the condition of our hearts and our willingness to submit to His guidance. When we obey in the small things, we create momentum that paves the way for larger blessings. Conversely, ignoring His instructions in seemingly trivial matters can create delays, obstacles, or vulnerabilities that hinder the flow of God's favor. Every choice is an opportunity to demonstrate faith, to align with divine wisdom, and to invite the supernatural into our everyday lives. Discerning the significance of small choices requires spiritual sensitivity. God communicates in subtle ways, and He often speaks through gentle nudges, impressions, or inner convictions. These communications are not always dramatic, but they are powerful. The enemy seeks to cloud our perception, tempting us to dismiss these promptings as trivial or irrelevant. Yet obedience in these moments is what separates a life that experiences the fullness of God's protection and favor from a life that struggles unnecessarily. When we act on the Spirit's guidance, even in minor matters, we activate a spiritual principle, the principle of alignment. Alignment with God's will ensures that we are walking in His favor and under His protective covering at all times. Faith expressed through obedience also strengthens our relationship with God. Each act of obedience, each choice to follow His guidance, reinforces our trust and intimacy with Him. We begin to recognize His voice more clearly, discern His direction more accurately, and respond with greater confidence. The ripple effect of obedience extends beyond the immediate outcome. It transforms our character, strengthens our spiritual perception, and positions us for greater levels of blessing and responsibility. God honors the faith that moves into action, and the life that consistently obeys is the life that reflects His favor visibly and tangibly. The enemy cannot withstand a life that walks in obedience. When we submit fully to God, following His instructions faithfully, we create a spiritual momentum that is unassailable. Discouragement, fear, and misfortune lose their grip. Opportunities flow, protection is evident, and favor manifests in ways that are unmistakable. Obedience is not burdensome, it is liberating. It is the path to experiencing God's supernatural intervention in every aspect of life. When we embrace obedience, we are not only following God's guidance, we are partnering with Him in the unfolding of His plan for our lives, allowing His wisdom to guide our steps and His power to surround our journey. Faith is expressed through action, not just prayer. Many believers think that their prayers alone are sufficient to move mountains, to bring breakthrough, or to unlock favor, yet true faith is always active. Prayer is vital. It connects us to God, aligns our hearts with His will, and strengthens our spirit. But it is the corresponding actions, grounded in obedience, that allow faith to manifest visibly in the natural world. A tree does not grow by wishing alone. It requires roots, water, sunlight, and care. In the same way, faith requires action. It requires that we do what God instructs, respond to His guidance, and step forward even when the path seems unclear. The combination of prayer and action produces results that prayer alone cannot achieve. This is the principle of living faith. It moves, it acts, it obeys, and it trusts that God's promises will manifest. Too often, believers stop at prayer, believing that voicing their requests is enough to see change. Yet faith is tested and proven in action. When God speaks, He expects us to act. Every instruction, every divine prompting is a call to move. Waiting passively without action shows a lack of trust in God's authority and wisdom. On the other hand, when we respond actively, we demonstrate confidence in His plan, humility in recognizing His wisdom above our own, and trust in His timing. Faith is not just an internal belief. It is a dynamic force that produces measurable outcomes. Every step taken in obedience becomes a channel for God's blessing, a conduit for favor, and a shield against adversity. Obedience amplifies the effectiveness of our faith. A prayer without obedience may go unanswered, not because God is unwilling, but because the believer has not positioned themselves properly to receive the answer. Obedience is the alignment between God's will and human action. It is the point where divine power intersects with our lives, creating supernatural results. God desires that we be faithful in the small matters because these small acts of obedience are the foundation for larger miracles. Ignoring the instructions of the Spirit, even in minor ways, can block favor, delay answers, and leave us vulnerable to the enemy's schemes. The spiritual principle is clear. Faith that moves into action activates God's power, while faith that remains passive limits the flow of His blessings. Obedience also demonstrates our submission to God's authority. It is an outward expression of inward trust, showing that we believe His wisdom surpasses our understanding. Many times, instructions from God may seem unusual, difficult, or even illogical from a human perspective. Yet obedience in these moments is what differentiates a life that walks in favor and protection from a life that experiences unnecessary struggle. It is through this alignment, this faithful response, that God's supernatural intervention becomes evident. Each act of obedience, no matter how small, contributes to building a life that is spiritually secure, prosperous, and aligned with His plan. God's insight is higher than human understanding. This is a principle that challenges our natural reasoning and invites us to embrace humility. We are limited in our perception. We cannot see the invisible spiritual forces that affect our lives, nor can we fully comprehend the ripple effects of our choices. God, however, knows the beginning from the end. He sees the obstacles we cannot perceive and the opportunities that lie ahead. His instructions, though sometimes puzzling to our natural mind, carry perfect wisdom and divine timing. When we accept that His insight is beyond our comprehension, we cultivate trust, patience, and willingness to obey even when circumstances suggest otherwise. Trusting God's wisdom is the foundation of spiritual maturity. Human understanding is bound by the natural world, but God operates in both the natural and spiritual realms. This dual perspective allows Him to guide us in ways that prevent harm, create advantage, and prepare the ground for blessing. Instructions that seem minor to us may have monumental spiritual significance. God's perspective encompasses the seen and unseen, the present and future, the temporal and eternal. When we align our decisions with His guidance, even in areas that seem trivial, we enter a flow of favor and protection that cannot be replicated by human effort. The life that submits to God's insight is one that experiences divine timing, supernatural provision, and extraordinary alignment with His will. Faith and obedience are inseparable. Faith without obedience is incomplete, and obedience without faith is empty. True faith trusts the unseen, acts on divine direction, and anticipates results even when there is no visible evidence. Obedience validates faith. When we obey God, we declare that we believe in His sovereignty, that we accept His plan, and that we submit to His wisdom. Every instruction we follow, every prompting we act upon, strengthens our connection with the Spirit, sharpens our discernment, and positions us to experience protection, favor, and breakthrough. The combination of faith and obedience is the engine that powers miracles, opens doors, and secures God's promises in our lives. This obedience, even in small matters, has consequences. It creates misalignment, opens the door to delay, and can allow the enemy to influence our circumstances. The spiritual world is real, and the forces of darkness are constantly at work, seeking to hinder progress, discourage believers, and obstruct God's plan. When we ignore divine guidance or act contrary to His instructions, we inadvertently create vulnerabilities. This is why obedience is not optional but essential. Each step taken in alignment with God's word fortifies our lives, protects us from spiritual attack, and prepares us to receive the fullness of His blessings. Faith expressed in action also transforms our character. Obedience requires humility, patience, and trust. It challenges pride, nurtures dependence on God, and trains the spirit to discern divine wisdom over human reasoning. Each decision made in submission to God strengthens spiritual sensitivity, enabling us to recognize His voice more clearly and respond more accurately in the future. The cumulative effect of consistent obedience is a life that not only experiences favor and protection, but also becomes a testimony of God's faithfulness. Others will see the evidence of His power and alignment in our lives, and our actions will inspire faith in those around us. Faith and obedience together position us to walk in divine favor. Favor is not random luck. It is a direct result of alignment with God's will. When we obey, we create a spiritual momentum that attracts blessing, protection, and opportunities that would otherwise remain closed. Favor opens doors in business, relationships, health, and every aspect of life. It is the supernatural advantage that comes when God aligns circumstances in our favor. The obedient believer experiences a life that moves smoothly in ways that defy natural explanation, where challenges are met with provision and obstacles are transformed into opportunities. To walk in favor and protection requires vigilance, sensitivity to the Spirit, and consistent obedience. It is not a one-time act, but a lifestyle of faith in action. Each day presents choices, both large and small, and each choice is an opportunity to demonstrate trust in God's guidance. When we act on His instructions, we validate our faith, activate His favor, and secure His protection. This alignment produces a life that is steady, blessed, and influential, one that reflects His glory and demonstrates His power in tangible ways. Obedience is a spiritual principle, a law that governs the flow of God's blessings. When we understand and apply this principle, our faith becomes effective, our prayers become powerful, and our lives become aligned with divine favor. Every decision, every action, every response matters. Faith expressed in obedience produces results, opens doors, shields from harm, and positions us to walk in God's extraordinary favor and protection. Small choices can open doors to blessing or delay. Every decision we make, no matter how minor it seems, carries spiritual weight and consequences. God pays attention to our habits, our words, and our actions because they reflect the state of our hearts. When we align our choices with His guidance, we position ourselves to receive favor, protection, and divine opportunities. Ignoring His instructions, even in trivial matters, can create obstacles, delays, or unnecessary struggle, allowing the enemy to gain a foothold. Listening to the Spirit brings peace and victory. The Holy Spirit constantly guides, nudges, and warns us in subtle ways, helping us navigate life with discernment. When we cultivate sensitivity to His voice, we learn to recognize His promptings, respond with faith, and experience supernatural alignment in every area of life. The combination of careful choices and attentive listening produces a life of favor, triumph, and unstoppable progress. Divine guidance empowers and transforms our lives. When we obey God's instructions, even in the smallest matters, we invite His power to work through us, bringing transformation in our character, our circumstances, and our relationships. The Spirit shapes our decisions, strengthens our resolve, and aligns our steps with His will, turning ordinary moments into opportunities for supernatural breakthrough. Walking in God's instructions leads to testimony and favor. A life lived in obedience becomes a living witness of His goodness, attracting blessings and inspiring others. Favor flows not because of human effort, but because of alignment with God's wisdom and faithfulness. Those who follow His guidance experience protection, breakthrough, and open doors that remain closed to the world, reflecting the Spirit's power in tangible ways, creating momentum for greater victories, and establishing a life anchored in supernatural favor and divine authority today. We've seen something incredible. God's guidance touches every detail of our lives, from the smallest decisions to the largest moments of destiny. We've learned that some choices, even something as simple as a color, can invite favor or allow delay. That obedience to God is not optional but essential for protection and supernatural blessing. That faith is not just words, it must be expressed through action. And that God's insight is higher than our understanding, seeing what we cannot see and orchestrating what we cannot comprehend. Each small act of obedience, each sensitive listening to the Spirit, positions to experience favor, open doors, and walk in divine momentum. Every choice matters, every instruction matters, and every step taken in alignment with Him creates a life of testimony, empowerment, and unstoppable victory. So today, I challenge you, listen closely, obey faithfully, and watch God transform every detail of your life. Favor, protection, and breakthrough are not just promises. They are yours when you walk in His guidance.